Okay, welcome to Insight into Iceland, the daily recap from the Mid-Season Invitational. We just finished up day 4, the first day of finishing off a group, and it was Group A. And the day didn't go quite as expected, which is exciting and fun to see. Some of the games went kind of the way we expected. So it started off with RNG stomping Unicorns of Love. No big surprise there. Then we got the first game of Unicorns versus Pentanet. And of course, these are the two teams fighting for the second spot to get out. Unicorns won this one, so they came back from Pentanet taking a game off them last time. They did a lot of skirmishing. Pentanet were focusing on the dragons, which was a bit of a theme on the day for them. Pentanet just failed to. The main thing to me is they failed to create the right flank angles with their Ari and their Renekton. And I think you kind of want the Renekton flanking in that comp and trying to get into the middle of everyone and create kind of this mosh pit scenario. They just were having a hard time setting that up. So there was a little bit of messiness. UOL managed to get that one. Went into another RNG game and they destroyed Pentanet. Then they destroyed Unicorns again. So we moved past kind of those RNG games. We got the rematch, Pentanet against UOL. And this is the one where if Pentanet won it, then they would tie up the records between them and potentially force a tiebreaker. And Pentanet again focused a lot on bot side, controlling the dragons. This time they managed to stack them up all the way to getting the actual soul. Unicorns were playing with Oriana. Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong game there. With Vladimir for No Man's, and just really struggled to get him online and get him into the positions he needed. By the time he was able to do something like, dive into a Baron pit, which Vladimir loves to do, into a tight enclosed space and use his W and use his ult and all of that. By the time they were there, it was a little too late. They were too far behind. Pentanet were a bit clumsy with their lead. They didn't really apply it in the most efficient way, but it was enough. The lead was big enough. And they managed to close that one out. So we got the 2-2 head-to-head between those two. And then we had game 6 of the day. So this was RNG against Pentanet. And the story here was, as long as RNG win, which everybody expects them to do very handily, then we get the tiebreaker. And RNG decide to dress Xiaobai for the game, sit Cryan, and move Xiaohu from top back into mid, which has been historically his role, and he only role swapped to top for this season so far. So, not like it's some crazy out-of-character swap, but it's a very unusual change to do, and I'll talk a little bit more about my thoughts on that in a minute, but, the result at the end of it is RNG still destroy them very convincingly. Xiaohu plays Ryze in the mid lane, and he just walks all over the game. I don't think it's any kind of a stretch to say that Xiaohu, despite playing top all split long, is actually a better mid laner than Cryan, which is not really flame on Cryan so much as Xiaohu's a really good player. So RNG roll through that game. We get the tiebreaker. UOL, PGG. Pentanet got a really great performance from Decoy. I think he really caught my eye this game with a roam to mid, playing well in a skirmish, having some really good reaction flashes when Santos or Ananasik would come after him and he'd flash back out of the play, and that would allow Pentanet to kind of punish that extension and collapse on him, find some kills that way. Eventually UOL were kind of chasing the game. They went after a play into the top lane, couldn't close off that pick. Got collapsed on again, and Ananasik got caught rotating, and he was playing a Kha'Zix, so it was kind of squishy. Pabu got some good stuff done with the Karthus and a big ult that led to a 20-minute Baron. The play I was just describing was happening at like 1930, so they went to Baron on spawn, secured it, had a couple of pushes at the Nexus. First one was a little iffy and did not work out, but the second one did, and they closed off the game and awesome. Great for Pentanet. They get to go through to the next stage of the tournament. Huge achievement for them. Really excited for them. I think that's one of my big takeaways from the day is the level of, coming into this tournament, they were memeing around. You could tell they're just having a lot of fun on stage. Didn't really have much expectations for themselves. They picked the "Hold On, We're Going Home" song as their theme. Hey, we're not going to be advancing the next stage of the tournament. Just kind of taking it very lightheartedly. And yet they still went out and tried, right? They did their best, and against very high odds, they managed to succeed. And this is an attitude that I think I've really been happy to see and have been preaching for a very long time. There's been a lot of fatalism, I think, in the league community at different times, especially back at like the gap days with Korea being so far ahead of everyone and we'll never beat them. we're all playing for second best, and let's just focus on that. And I think you can get a little bit of fatalism in the NA community. Oh, we'll never be as good as Europe or, them again. So let's just, be angry and flame everybody about how bad NA is. No, focus on the ways that you can improve. Focus on the things you can achieve and things a little bit above what you think you can achieve. And then these things can happen. So I was really excited to see that. So now speaking to the big topic, I think, of the day, RNG's decision, as mentioned, to play Xiao Bai, to move Xiaohu mid. And I think, there are different perspectives on this. And I think most people don't really have an issue with what they did. And I'm in the minority where I really am not happy with it. I think it was pretty disrespectful personally. But the overall take on this, I'll try to kind of lay out my thoughts on it. If RNG made this roster change because it had some benefit to them, and they thought, if we do this, it's going to help us out and it's going to benefit our chances for the rest of the tournament or even the rest of the year, whatever it's going to be, then that's fine, right? They don't have any obligation to Unicorns to say, we have to do our absolute best to win this game to hand you the tiebreaker. Our RNG are not beholden to doing what is good for Unicorns. They are there to do what's good for them. But there's also a certain amount of respect for the game itself and for the tournament itself. And you would not feel okay with RNG, totally throwing the game just because it didn't make a difference to them. And it would be funny to, to screw over Unicorns that way. If they did the change because it was, it would be funny or just entertaining, and they'd play, if they'd done something like drafted some super weird comp that doesn't make any sense in the meta, and we're just pure entertainment value, I'm not okay with that, because I don't think that shows a lack of respect for the tournament and for the integrity of the game. So your take on all this comes down to, what are the reasons that you assume that RNG made this change? And that's really it. They're never going to tell us exactly why they did it, what their thought process was. In the media scrum afterwards, I asked the question to Wei, who was doing the interview, what was the reasoning for this change? And he gave kind of the answer you'd assume. Hey, we'd already advanced to the Rumble stage. We wanted to practice more strategies as a team, is what he said. So that explanation, they're not going to, if they were doing it just for the fun, they're not going to say that. I sure hope they wouldn't. If they were doing it for real benefits to themselves, there are certain benefits that they might be willing to say publicly and certain ones they aren't. So it was kind of a middle of the road, kind of pat answer. And I think that answer of wanting to practice more strategies, it only holds water as an actual argument if you believe that RNG are either, are going to use Xiao Bai in the rest of this tournament, or if it means something for the rest of the year. So I want to talk through, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I want to talk through some of the potential legit reasons they might have done this, and then some of the other reasons why that might not have been legit, and the things that do kind of rub me the wrong way about it. And I want to start by making the parallel that everybody always makes in these kinds of conversations, and this is by far not the first time this type of scenario or conversation has been had in League of Legends. But in traditional sports, at the end of towards the end of a regular season, heading into kind of playoff time, you do get teams sitting out their star players, and kind of playing younger players if they are, let's say, already qualified for the playoffs. Whether it's an NFL team sitting out their starting quarterback in the final game if they're already in the playoffs either way, or an NBA team, they got a couple of games left in their season, whatever it's going to be, you will get that. I don't think you really get it in the NHL. I think you do a little bit, but in hockey, a little bit of a different culture, I would say. But I think you can get it a bit there as well. So some of the reasons that these traditional sports teams will do it, once they're already qualified, they want to deal with physical fatigue, right? They want to give their players a rest from this really grueling schedule, and every actual game is a lot more difficult on the body than practice is. And so they want to give them, a few extra days or an extra week to kind of rest up, and everybody's playing, kind of banged up and bruised and whatever it's going to be, or just tired. And it's good for their physical fatigue. Another reason is to avoid injuries. You don't want your star player to go play in a game that doesn't mean anything and risk that 1% chance or whatever it is that they're going to get hurt and you won't have them for the playoffs. So that's potentially a big reason as well. In some of these, especially in some of these very physical sports, like the NFL or the NHL, hockey, American football. There might also be a valid reason of wanting to give your kind of substitute players, especially since a lot of the time they're younger and less experienced, you want to give them some playtime. You want to take a look at how they're performing. More experience in official games is valuable, so that can be a valid reason in traditional sports as well. So how well do these apply to the League of Legends scenario and to what we were looking at today? So the fatigue argument. You don't have the same physical fatigue, right? We're not talking about players who after every game, they have a certain amount of bruises on their body and their muscles have just expended. Like, it's not physical, but you can look at mental fatigue, right? You can look at, hey, the amount you have to focus. It does take a toll on your body. You might not be getting bruised up, but you are wearing yourself down. And you're operating at kind of a heightened level, and your heart rate goes up and all these kinds of things. There is absolutely real fatigue there. And so managing that might be a valid reason. There's also the idea of injuries, right? You're not going to get physical injuries from playing, probably. If the players on RNG were dealing with any kind of, the types of injuries that can come with esports, wrist pain and maybe back pain or things like that, and if it was enough to affect them potentially in the tournament, they should have rested them more of the day, right? If there's an actual physical reason for them to be resting, they probably should have sat out more than just the last game because they had locked it in before that. And then, of course, it's a question of, like, I guess in that case, the only player you could maybe make that argument with is Cryan, because he's the one who sat out. So if Cryan had some fatigue or injuries to manage, fair enough. I don't think we have any reason to assume that he did. But it's a potential explanation. Then you have the idea of giving a younger player stage time. So Xiaobai, did they want to give him some stage time for the experience? Like, hey, you got to play an international event. Let's see how you do. We get to know a little bit more about you as kind of like an asset in our organization. It's good for you. Maybe. If that was a real motivation, why did they put Xiaohu mid? If all they wanted was to give Xiaobai more stage time, then I would argue, like, leaving Cryan in and just sitting Xiaohu would give him a much better opportunity. Also because Xiaohu plays, from what I understand, a larger role in the team than Cryan does. So giving him I guess you can argue that having like a shot caller, if Xiaohu's the shot caller, or that kind of stabilizing factor will help Xiaobai be more comfortable. But I'd say throw him in a little bit more hot water if you just want to give him that experience and see how he handles it. Don't alter the rest of the team's roster. So I don't really think the giving a younger player more stage time, I don't think that explanation really holds water to me either. So if you apply Occam's razor to all this, which is the concept in kind of logic that the simplest explanation is the most likely to be true, which is, I think, a pretty good rule to work with. I don't think the fatigue argument or the injury argument or the younger player getting experience argument, I don't think any of those are you have to make some assumptions that go beyond the simplest explanation in order for those to apply. I think you can argue a little bit on the idea of not so much mental fatigue, but like attitude and just strain. That's the one that's the most likely to me that, we have a lot of very serious games coming up. Let's not stretch ourselves too far. Let's allow the players to kind of have a little bit of fun and lighten their mood and so on. And G2 esports have used this argument before, doing things that I would call much more egregious than what our RNG did today. And I've had the same kinds of things as this to say when G2 did it. So maybe it's that, right? But I think that RNG have not exactly had to strain themselves in the tournament at all yet. So I find it a little unreasonable that they would need that kind of levity to break up their experience. There are some other reasons that I think that are unique to this circumstance and to League of Legends that don't really apply in the traditional sports sense. So one is hiding information. If RNG play Xiaobai and they move Xiaohu mid, well, any of the teams they're about to play in the next stage can't use this game as any scouting for what's going to happen in the next phase of the tournament because it just doesn't apply anymore. So maybe they wanted to hide some information. I don't think they really need to. I think you could just play something very standard with your normal roster, and you're not going to learn anything from it anyways because they're just so much better than the other teams that they don't have any strategy to show. They don't have to do any real strategies that might be revealing. But I think that is something you could argue, is that they wanted to hide some info from their future opponents. Another one is, Cryan being the player who sat out. Maybe it was about him, and he did get solo killed. And maybe the coaching staff wanted to send him a bit of a message, like, hey, you need to step up. You're not looking good in these games. And I don't think he has had a good tournament so far. He had a couple of games that were a little better, but I think maybe they wanted to send him a message and say, hey, look, we can push Xiaohu mid and win without you. Like, maybe he's having some attitude problems or cockiness or something that they wanted to address. So I think that's another reason that might be valid. When you put all these things out, I think there are enough little breadcrumbs here and there that if you want to make the argument that RNG did this for their own internal reasons and something that they thought would benefit themselves, you can get yourself there. I don't convince myself that it's there. I think it's more likely to me that RNG thought, let's do something fun. Let's give the fans a different look. Let's play something a little different. Let's let Xiaohu, go mid because he hasn't gotten to this split and just have some fun there and just walk over people. And I think they just didn't take the game too seriously. And that's the thing that bothers me, is that this is a game that had really high consequences if RNG had managed to lose this game, which they didn't come anywhere close to be fair. If they managed to lose it and it knocked Unicorns out of the tournament, and if I was part of the Unicorns organization, I would be furious. But that's in the end, that's neither here nor there. I think RNG made their choice. We're never going to know exactly what was in their motivations for it, and ultimately the validity of those moves do come down to their motivations. It's not something that is ever going to be directly addressed, but I do think that on the whole, the conversation has a lot of nuance to it that is not covered by just saying they do this exact same thing in traditional sports, because I don't think it is the exact same thing, and I don't think it's fair either to say RNG can do whatever they want, and if they wanted to completely troll this game, Unicorns wouldn't have any reason to be mad, because I think they would have a reason to be mad. I think there's a certain amount of respect for, hey, we're all going to try our best, and whoever wins, wins. Respect for the opponents, respect for the game and the tournament. And if you don't play it that way, and you only try hard for certain games, I think that is disrespectful to your opponents. But that's me personally. I think I'm quite old school that way, and a lot of people aren't. So I just wanted to explain kind of my rationale for how I feel about it. And, you're welcome to have a different opinion on it, as most of you do. So there it is. On the whole, I think the day was a pretty good day of MSI. Not having the expected outcome, which again is continuing to ramp up as a theme for MSI, is this isn't all predictable. And I hope that continues and keeps being entertaining. I just hope maybe not the roster swap kind of part of it continuing, but the entertainment part of it, let's keep that going. We'll see what happens again tomorrow. Thanks for listening.